I'm joined by Dr. Judy Ho, triple board certified forensic and neuropsychologist. Dr. Judy, we're talking about the Dark Triad personality types. And in this video, we're specifically talking about psychopathy. Can you explain what that is and how it relates to the Dark Triad?
Absolutely. Psychopathy is a constellation of traits, but the most notable ones are a person who lacks empathy and will do anything to get their own goals met, no matter how many people it hurts or how many bridges they burn. This is an individual who generally doesn't live by society's expectations, don't really care about norms and conventions, and usually not rules and laws either, believe that they are special and can circumvent the law. Usually psychopaths have a real difficult time settling down, having consistent and long relationships, or staying at a job for very long. They're always on the move. And they're individuals who tend to be very callous and don't seem to have a deep connection to other human beings. It's thought to be the darkest of the dark triad traits because generally a person who has a high psychopath score on a psychopath test will do more damage to people in the world than people who are called high max, high Machiavellianism trait, or high narcissist traits. So it is the one that essentially is the most predictive of the most negative outcomes associated with the dark triad.
And when you say psychopathy, are we talking about antisocial personality disorder?
Psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder are not quite the same. Antisocial personality disorder is a diagnosis in the DSM, whereas psychopath is a trait or a dimension that has some associations and correlations with antisocial personality disorder, but is sort of its own thing that is not a diagnosis and rather thought of as a trait dimension. So ways to measure psychopathy, for example, are with the Hare psychopathy test. That one is very famous and the most utilized to capture this trait. But somebody could have the traits and not have antisocial personality disorder. Most people who have antisocial personality disorder, though, will meet some criteria for the psychopath traits.
Are psychopaths born that way, or are they raised and influenced by their environment?
It's a really great question. I feel like in colloquial conversation, people want to have that very clearly delineated somehow. Like I've heard people say, well, are psychopaths more like they're made? And then sociopaths they're born that way. And I don't think it's that clear. I think that in general, the research will show that it's a combination of environmental and possibly familial or genetic factors. So certainly we've seen some brain abnormalities in individuals who have psychopathic traits. For example, they have frontal lobe differences where their frontal lobe seems to be less active than the average individual. And that is the part of your brain that focuses on decision-making and higher order functions and manages impulse control. And all of these aspects are impaired in individuals who have psychopathy. But also, you've seen examples of people who might have sort of these brain differences, but then they were raised in loving environments where there were a lot of pro-social models around, people teaching them what's right and what's wrong and how to behave in society and what's really helpful to other people and why they should care about that. And those individuals don't really go on to wreak havoc in their communities. They actually tend to be quite productive, but every once in a while they can sort of have this moment where they have to be reminded, hey, that wasn't very empathetic. And they're like, oh, okay. But overall, they function very well in society. But individuals who then are exposed to abusive households, to negative consequences and environments, especially when they're young, then they tend to develop their psychopathic trait even further. And those are the individuals that you see that have negative impact to their communities.
Yeah. When can we start to see the signs of psychopathy?
You can start to see the signs of psychopathy at a pretty young age. Even when the person is a child, they start to show that lack of empathy, sometimes in their cruelty to animals or cruelty to other children. They also tend not to really understand consequences, and sometimes they may even laugh at the face of a consequence. So instead of feeling bad about being punished, for example, feeling bad about being grounded, they just laugh in the face of that and they run away anyway, for example. They still leave the house, they don't come back for 3 weeks. Early alcohol and drug abuse, that's not an exclusive predictor, but it is one of the predictors of further psychopathy traits as an adult.
Dr. Judy, any final words on this really interesting topic of psychopathy?
Well, I think oftentimes the main question I get from people is, oh my gosh, is my sister a psychopath? Is my husband a psychopath? Is my teacher a psychopath? You start to want to diagnose everybody with this trait. And I would say, slow down. The Hare psychopathy checklist, for example, actually captures 21 traits within this concept of psychopathy. So just one or two things doesn't mean that the person is a psychopath. Also, just because a person has psychopathic traits doesn't mean that they're going to harm you or be a complete menace to society. It really does depend on a number of factors, so try not to jump to too many conclusions. So just like not self-diagnosing people with clinical conditions, let's not diagnose somebody with this trait and start using that as a name calling in your next argument with a loved one.
What do you guys think? Do you have anything to add on top of this conversation? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.